Actually, if you look at the history of the last 20 years, successive governments have been too optimistic about the amount of production and therefore the amount of revenue that we get from the North Sea. And as you say, the Office of Budget Responsibility, which is independent of government, it's given its estimates and it has proved to be too optimistic. And I'll just give you an example of what the problem is. In the last couple of years, the amount of revenue we've got from the North Sea has been £5 billion less than was expected. That £5 billion, to give you an example of what that does, that is equivalent to more than we spend in schools in Scotland and almost half what we spend on the health service. So if you lost that sum in any one year, as happened last year, it means for Scotland it would have to make good that either by raising taxes elsewhere or cutting back on public expenditure.
Do you think the Office for Budget Responsibility estimates, which are far lower than the industry, far lower than Sir Ian Wood suggests, do you think they're too low? Are they being too pessimistic?
Actually, if you look back, they have been too optimistic. The problem has been, looking ahead, we've never extracted as much North Sea as people expect. Now, Sir Ian Wood was commissioned by the government to see how we could get more oil extracted. But he last week, and he is probably one of the leading experts in the North Sea, he has said that the Scottish government is is being wildly optimistic about the amount of oil revenue we're going to get. Now, I hope we get more oil revenues from the North Sea. Our problem is, though, if you don't, and remember, an independent Scotland would get about 15% of its revenues from the North Sea. Hold on, you'll get in just a moment. You'll get in plenty of time, I'm quite sure of that. It's a much smaller proportion of the revenue for the UK. What I say is we're taking on a huge amount of risk because North Sea oil revenues are volatile, they're uncertain, and that would mean huge cuts to public expenditure if it went wrong, as it has done in the last year.
Well, Glenn, I was just going to note that Alistair twice in that answer said that the OBR was independent and to be trusted. Yet in 2010, he said it wasn't so much a part of government, but had become a part of the Conservative Party. That's what he said.
No, you're being misleading. You are misleading.
As far as Ian Wood is concerned,
not for the first time. You are being totally misleading
you
about
asked
that.
me not to interrupt you, so please do me the same
don't say things that aren't right.
Alistair. Ian Wood, I accept Ian Wood as a very respected figure in the oil industry. But let's just take his estimate, that's Ian Wood's estimate, of the future reserves of North Sea oil. He says there will be between 17 to 18.5 billion barrels. That's 1,000 million barrels over the next 35 years.
15 to 16.5.
Well, 15 to 16.5. Well, in financial terms, that is worth £1 trillion. That's 1,000 billion terms in wholesale value. 1,000 million. It's a lot of billions. It's a lot of money. The No campaign, the Tory party, the Labour Party, are the only people in the world who argue that the possession of substantial amounts of oil and gas is somehow a curse, as opposed to an asset for a country.
This is nonsense.
Every other country in the world thinks it's an asset.
You're quoting the wholesale value of oil. What the government actually gets is the tax from that, and all of the profits from that actually go to America and places like that. What I say to you, Alex, is that North Sea has been a colossal boon to this country for 40 years. But what you can't get away from is that once it's gone, it's gone. Yes. And slowly but surely, every barrel we take out of the North Sea, there's one barrel less. What I don't want to see is my country so dependent on something that is so volatile that in 1 year alone last year you lost more revenues than we spend on the whole of the schools in Scotland.
I mean, it is the case, Mr. Salmond,
is taking one huge gamble with our children's future.
It is the case that your own government's forecasts have been downgraded by something like £1 billion for the first year of independence. That's an acceptance that this is a volatile resource which would be much more important to the economy of an independent Scotland than it is to the economy of the UK. Don't you feel it's a risk?
Well, let's say that North Sea oil and gas would be about 15% of Scotland's overall economy. It's 20% of Norway's overall economy, and I haven't seen it doing Norway much harm over the last 40 years. Now, Alistair says the last 40 years have been great, but 40 years ago, Alistair's colleagues were telling us that North Sea oil and gas would be run out by the year 2000. The reality is that North Sea oil and gas will be with us way beyond 2050. Alistair says that I was quoting a wholesale value. Well, let's say that 20% of it is the revenue that goes to the government. That's £200 billion, £200,000 million, £6 billion a year. The reality is, Alistair, that every other country in Europe would give their eye teeth to have North Sea oil and gas. It cannot be regarded as anything other than a substantial asset for the people of Scotland.
But it's notoriously volatile. You are promising all sorts of things on the basis of a source of revenue that is very volatile, that would make up a very substantial part of Scotland's income. Oil is a great thing to have, but to rely so much on something, and even since last year when you published your white paper, where you put in 650 pages, there was just 1 page of numbers for just 1 year, and the estimates you made of the oil revenue then have proved to be wrong. They are much lower than you thought. So to tell people that somehow we can rely on this it is gambling our children's future, which I think is just totally unacceptable.
I want to move to our second question on the economy. It comes from Cathy Devlin. Cathy.
I would like to know, in an independent Scotland, I'd like a definitive answer exactly what currency we will use if we don't